The brands that AI recommends give their customers something generic content never could. It's critical you keep that fact in mind even as AI drives down the cost of content creation and curation. Yeah, you can use AI to put together all kinds of posts and pages and podcasts, but do any of those actually help your customers? I've addressed this concept a couple of times in recent months, and the evidence keeps getting stronger. Earlier this summer, I covered research from Daniel Stanica that tracked 100 once successful blogs between 2022 and 2026. The results were devastating. The median site lost 85% of its search traffic. 65 of the 100 dropped by 50% or more. Only 21 of those blogs grew. When Daniel dug into what separated the 21 that survived from the 79 that collapsed, he found 4 traits they had in common. First-hand experience that can't just be summarized by an AI. An owned audience that blogs could connect to directly. A real product. And a brand that their readers were willing to search for by name. That research came out this year, just a couple of months ago. The episode you're about to hear was recorded a couple of months before that research existed. In the earlier episode, AI made content free, here's what made it priceless. I argued that AI has driven the cost of producing content to effectively zero, and that when anyone can create massive volumes of content for free, the value of your content doesn't also fall to zero. Instead, the value shifts. What's become priceless isn't just content. Instead, it's what's behind that content. Your own real lived experiences. Your genuine relationships with your customers. Your authentic, honest, expert voice. And the data that only you have about what matters to your customers in their lives every day. Stanica's 100 blogs showed what happens to generic content in reality. The blogs that collapsed built their businesses by churning out content that any AI could produce. They were optimizing for algorithms, not creating for people. The blogs that survived built their businesses on content only they could produce. The market told them what matters. And it's telling you too. Now, here's what makes this more urgent than when I first recorded the original episode. We're not just talking about blogs here. We're talking about any business whose customer acquisition depends on content, which essentially is every business. Still, content is king. It's the first, most frequent, and sometimes the only interaction your customers will have with your brand before they buy. The pattern in Stanica's blog data is playing out with organic search, it's playing out with AI recommendations, and it's playing out in the verification behaviors that customers exhibit after they hear about your brand from an AI tool. The brands that AI recommends consistently, the ones that customers find and verify and choose, are the ones building something no one else can claim. Not more content, not optimized content, better content, more useful content, and most importantly, more authentic content, content that only they can create. That's what we're talking about here today. It's one of the most important arguments I can make, and the market has now backed it up in ways I didn't have access to when I first hit record. I think you're going to find it even more valuable today than it was the first time around. I'm Tim Peter. This is Digital Reset Foundations, episode 505. Let's dive in. It's abundantly clear that AI-generated content is here and that it's absolutely flooding digital spaces every single day. You do not need me to tell you that. You see it every single day. If you're interested in some of the economic underpinnings, though, there's a National Bureau of Economic Research paper from Kim, Jin, and Lee published earlier this year that used Pixiv data and shows that generative AI crowded out human creators. I'll link to it in the show notes. Similarly, research last year from Ahrefs said that 86.5% of top-ranking pages contained some amount of AI-generated content. That's a quote. While I have a few quibbles with their methodology, I'm relatively convinced that a fairly healthy chunk of content on the web involves AI in its production somewhere along the way, just as their research found. And again, I'll link to their research in the show notes. Finally, some research from Graphite.io claims that, and this is a quote, the quantity of AI-generated articles has surpassed the quantity of human-written articles being published on the web. They claim, contra Ahrefs findings, that these articles, quote, largely do not appear in Google and ChatGPT. They also ignore AI-generated/human-edited articles, while noting that, quote, they may be even more prevalent. You think? And yes, I'll link to their research in the show notes, too. The point is that AI-generated content is everywhere online. It's a core part of how content comes into being today. Most of that content is, at minimum, pretty okay, and some of it is actually quite good. I'm willing to bet that you're seeing that same reality. At the same time, AI-generated materials are so common now that we're starting to see a bit of a backlash lately, with lots of folks talking about AI slop showing up in search and other social media timelines. That slop critique hints at the problem. It kind of gets at the core of the problem. It's a flashing red light that says, we need to start doing something different. And I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. Before I do, though, there's one other signal that I have to address that shows why we need to think beyond AI content. It's called model collapse, and it points to a likely reality your free content faces longer term. In fact, it's something you might even be dealing with today. The basic principle behind model collapse that came from a paper published in Nature by Shumilov and his team all the way back, way back in July of 2024, so less than 2 years ago, found that, and this is a quote, indiscriminate use of model-generated content in training causes irreversible defects in the resulting models. In simple English, what their research showed was that training artificial intelligence on AI-generated content generally leads to increasingly bad outputs over time, much the same way that making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy will get blurrier and blurrier until eventually the output is unusable. Shumilov's team rightly worries that as large language models get trained on the increasing amounts of AI-generated content on the web, those LLMs will produce worse results over time. That concern seems 100% valid if we agree about the photocopy example, right? It's also apparently not likely to happen in practice, because follow-up research from Gerst-Grasser, Schaefer, Day, and Rafalov shows that as long as there's at least some original human data in the model, like all the web content produced before ChatGPT emerged, we're probably fine. But, and this is a key point, there is a related term we do need to think about. It's called collapse to uniformity. A group of researchers, while testing the idea of model collapse, discovered that, and again, this is a quote, textual similarity has been steadily increasing since 2013, with a significant acceleration from 2018 to 2022, coinciding with the public release of ChatGPT's earliest models. So that would be ChatGPT 2.0 and ChatGPT 3.0. They go on to say that, quote, the ecosystem may reach 90% saturation around 2035 and then just get worse from there. While 2035 may sound like a long way off, that's less than 9 years from now. If you're younger than, say, 50, that will occur in your career. Also, if we're going to hit 90% in less than 9 years' time, it suggests that we're hitting some percentage of it today. And I suspect that we're going to see an increase of roughly 10 points every year from now until then. I mean, if you think about it, that's just logical. If we're going to be at 90% roughly 9 years from now, we'll be at 80% 8 years from now, and 70% 7 years from now, and 50% 5 years from now, and 30% 3 years from now. Which is where the AI slop criticism becomes so critical. Human beings generally are pretty good, and I'm going to use a technical term here, they're pretty good detectors. Sure, not everyone's good at it to an equal degree. And sure, we all have our blind spots where we can get fooled. I know I do. But human beings are generally pretty good at sniffing out when something sounds fake. If you've ever heard of the uncanny valley in video games or CGI, it's where a human face looks very close to real, but not close enough, and people find it disturbing. Our brains just won't let us accept it as real. Think about a movie like The Polar Express. It just weirded people out because it was in that uncanny valley, close to real, but not quite close enough. AI slop, to me, is the uncanny valley of AI-generated content. AI-generated content sometimes doesn't sound human enough and sets off your customers' detectors, and they flag it as AI slop. They're the first 10% this year noting that something seems off in what companies and creators they're listening to are saying. The funny thing about this is that sometimes people online accuse creators of AI slop even when a human being actually created the content. And it's not because it was AI generated. It was because it didn't sound human, or at least human enough. It was too corporate. It was too polished. It was too fake. I'd argue as more people get wary about the text patterns and speech patterns of AI, they're going to also get more wary of corporations and creators relying on heavily polished statements. Marketing thought leaders, including people like me, have claimed for years that it's important to be authentic when you speak to your customers. Well, if we're picking up 10 points of AI detection every year, it's likely that a healthy chunk of customers, 25 to 30%, will demand that you be real, that you be clearly real in the next couple of years, if they're not already demanding it of you today. That's where I got that 2 to 3 year number in the intro. By the way, as a quick aside, I cannot talk about this topic any further without referencing my very good friend, Mark Schaefer. Mark has written extensively on this topic and has influenced my thinking significantly. His mantra about how the most human company wins in the age of AI echoes in my brain almost every single day. I cite him in my book. He's just a key speaker on this topic that you want to know about. I'm going to link to some of his thoughts in the show notes, and I would encourage you to check those out and follow him regularly. At any rate, that's why focusing on human connection to your customer isn't just scarce, it's the most precious asset you can build. Your voice, the true you, is the most precious asset you can build. That's why your content can no longer just be a generic explainer or a how-to video. They're dead. They don't work anymore. They don't matter. Instead, you have true, scarce, valuable assets that your content must put to work today. What are they? Well, they include several things. First is proprietary data. Data that you have, that you can see, and that no one else can about your customers, your market, your industry, and the world at large, is something that no one else can talk about with the genuine expertise and insight that you bring to the table. It's your story to tell, and you need to tell it if you're going to stand apart from generic AI-generated drivel. The second are original examples. Talk about what you've lived in real life, your customers, your projects, your outcomes, your experiences. There's a reason I talk about my hotel clients and other businesses I've worked with on this podcast, and that's because no one else has those specific experiences. They back up my thinking and research with real-world examples that no one else can claim. It works for my business. It'll work for yours too. And the third, of course, is expert voice, your expert voice. Did you notice my 2 to 3 year timeline that I mentioned earlier? That's my opinion. I don't have anything other than my expertise, my experience, and my assessment of the data that exists to back that up. I could be wrong. I could absolutely be wrong. Maybe it's 4 years. Maybe it's 1.5 years. I don't know, but I'm willing to put my name on it and make a prediction to stand out from the crowd. I'm willing to take the risk of being wrong because I believe it will help you now and it will help you in the future. And, candidly, because it will help others know who I am too. If I'm right, everybody wins. And if I'm wrong, I will either learn and improve, or no one should listen to me anyway. Right? Period. Together, those 3 attributes help me build a connection with my clients and listeners to the podcast and audiences on social media. They all work together to build the Digital Reset brand and to foster a community of like-minded individuals who are committed to learning and growing together. That same approach can work for you too. Here's how I would do it. Start by asking yourself 3 questions this week. First, what is our ratio of proprietary to commodity content over the last 90 days? Are we building named assets all our own, or just generic outputs that any AI could produce? 2, when a potential customer asks ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, or Perplexity about our category, what specifically about us shows up? Is it a reference that could have been written only by us? Or could it have been written by anyone? One of those is better for your brand long-term than the other, as you might expect. 3, who on our team is our named voice? Are we amplifying their signal? Are we boosting their signal? Or do they get buried in the content calendar of just generic stuff we put out there? Think about which of those has a future too. One big takeaway these questions should point you to is to focus on what makes you, you. What makes your brand stand apart? What makes you distinct? What makes you different from anyone else in the space? And different enough that people will listen to, and different enough that eventually people will give you money for. Not for your content, but for the solutions and products and services that you offer. That's where you want to live. That's where you need to live. Because in 2 to 3 years, if you don't already live there, you're in big, big trouble. Also, I don't want you to listen to this episode and necessarily think we need to publish less content. I mean, sure, this is about quality over quantity. Absolutely true. But it's about publishing more of what's scarce and less about publishing what's already abundant. That's why I wrote the introduction to this episode, and the whole episode for that matter. Not because I can write faster or cheaper than artificial intelligence. I can't. But because only I can produce the most scarce resource of all. Me. For better or worse, when you're hearing these episodes, when you're watching them on YouTube or listening to them on Spotify, you're hearing my experiences. You're hearing my data. You're hearing my voice. And that will be true today, 2 to 3 years from now, and for as long as you're willing to keep listening. AI did not kill content marketing. AI will not kill content marketing. What it's done is make the cheap parts worthless and the expensive parts crucial. Your job is to know which is which. Your job is to put your focus on the parts that are crucial. And it's to do that now and in the longer term too. And if you get that right, you don't have to worry about the next 2 to 3 years or the next 9. You'll be in great shape no matter what happens. I feel pretty confident that the argument I presented in this Foundations episode has held up. The brands AI recommends give customers something generic content never could. And Stanica's data from 100 real businesses over a 4-year period is proof for a prediction I made even before the evidence existed. Here's what I want to add as we wrap up. The episode you just heard focused on the content side of this argument, what to produce, how to think about data, original examples, and expert voice. What it didn't cover, because the data wasn't available yet, is what happens at the other end of the equation. What happens when your customer gets a recommendation from AI and then goes to verify it? That's a question I'm going to dig into in an upcoming episode. Because here's what we now know. Your customer's journey has changed. AI is inserting itself as part of the verification step, not after it. Consumers who hear about you from an AI tool usually don't go straight to the purchase. They go to Google or to your website or to your reviews to check, to confirm, to corroborate. What they find in that moment of verification is where their decision actually gets made. The content side of this argument tells you what you need to build if you're going to get recommended. The verification side tells you what to build to get chosen. Both matter, and we're going to cover both. Additionally, Big Tech is reporting its Q2 earnings this week, the week that we're recording this episode. And given everything we've covered over the last few months, the gatekeeper cycle, the blogging collapse, the rented land argument, I'm pretty sure those numbers are going to look very, very familiar. I'm going to have the full breakdown of what it means for your strategy in the next week or two. In the meantime, keep the question from today's episode in mind. What is your ratio of proprietary to commodity content in the last 90 days? What shows up about your brand when a prospect asks an AI about your category? And is it something only you could have said? And who is your named, authentic voice? Are you amplifying that voice or burying it? Those questions were the right place to start a few months back, and they still are today. As always, you can find the show notes at timpeter.com/podcasts. And if you're ready to go deeper on building a brand customers will ask for by name, my book, Digital Reset, Driving Marketing and Customer Acquisition Beyond Big Tech, is the roadmap you'll need. You can find it on Amazon.com and bookshop.org, and the links are in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening today. I genuinely appreciate all of your support. Until next time, please be well, be safe, and as always, be excellent to each other. I'll see you soon.